I'm Ben Quarry, and welcome back to the SSQ Podcast. Today, I'm rejoined by Kumara Mallikaaratchi, the head of our Australia office. Kumara, welcome back.
Thanks very much for having me, Ben. Good to be back on the pod.
Brilliant. And look, today I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing within the Australian market, because I'm conscious that, we're a very international business. We talk a lot about what we do around the world, but actually Australia is one of our newest businesses. And so just talk me through sort of what your focus is on within the market and, areas that perhaps are busier, the types of firm you're dealing with.
Starting point is actually I've been in the Australian market for coming up to 7 years. Mm-hmm. For a lot of that time, I've been working with all the premium firms across the nation. It's very clear in Australia that there is a focus from a pure economic standpoint that renewable energy is the biggest growing sector in Australia. And as we all know at SSQ, law firms pretty much follow where the sectors in the local economy are building and developing. So I'm often working with mainly partners at the very senior level in the renewable energy space. And that covers all types of practice in the sector.
Okay.
So all lawyers from everything you need in the project life cycle. So environmental planning, real estate, project finance, project documentation, corporate M&A, a sort of all service, cradle to grave sort of offering. It's a very interesting area of law at the moment in Australia, given a massive focus from the federal government in terms of shifting away from traditional energy towards renewable energy. Everybody talks about the 2030 targets in Australia, which is a big push by the federal government to increase the amount of electricity on the grid from renewable energy sources.
So you've got that sort of almost regulatory overlay on top of the conventional kind of project life cycle.
Massively so. So I think at the moment what you're seeing in Australia is a real shift where you've had federal government policy from the Labor government which supports renewable energy, and then each of the states have their own sort of take on that.
Okay.
So really interesting recently, the Queensland government was supportive of renewable energy, and now the sort of liberal leaders of the Queensland state government has shifted again away from renewable energy. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing this kind of very transient movement throughout the nation. But what is clear is that there is a shift towards decarbonisation, a shift away from coal fire, and a need for a different type of energy source. And the market clearly shows that renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy to supplement the grid.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in all forms. So that's mainly onshore wind, solar and BESS. BESS is probably the biggest area of development at the moment. And I'm working with law firms across the nation, all different types of law firms who are all interested in lawyers with that kind of skill set.
And so one of the things actually I wanted to ask is, so Australia obviously is a massive country. There are certain key hubs, right? Sydney being one of them, Perth presumably being one of them. I mean, are you working across all the major cities in Australia, or are you sort of just focused on one?
Our clients, i.e. the law firms, generally will hire and recruit across the nation.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for someone like myself to be doing the same. It's very jurisdiction specific as to what we would do in those regions. So to your point, Perth very much is still, or Western Australia as a whole is still very much embedded in traditional
mining country,
energy and resources. Yeah, mining country. So working with firms out in that region would be more in that space rather than in the renewable or clean energy space. Yeah. I would say the Eastern Seaboard now, it's pretty much jurisdiction agnostic as to where firms will hire their lawyers. Most of the tier one firms that have deep bench strength in renewable energy or clean energy have lawyers across Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Mm-hmm. It's not really that much of a significant difference between them. A lot of the clients, so developers, tend to be based down in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. We operate across the nation from Sydney, where I'm based.
Okay, fine. And in terms of you mentioned you deal with a wide variety of firms. Obviously, Australia as a market is one, partly because it's so far away from so many other jurisdictions, that is quite inward looking in terms of a lot of the work that Australian law firms are doing will be domestic Australia-based work. Obviously, there'll be cross-border work as well. There'll be stuff that you do, outside of Australia, but obviously a lot of it is inward looking. So, I mean, in terms of kind of the firms you're dealing with, obviously you have top domestic firms, you have international firms who've got presence there. Do you find there's a difference between how each of those sort of categories of firm operate, or is it very much the same that these are guys are the top people in the Australian market?
It's actually a very interesting time, particularly in energy, around that mid-market or national practice versus international law firm.
Yeah.
So traditionally, you'll see that the sort of premium international law firms are seen as the leaders in renewable energy. However, there's definitely been a shift on the client side in energy towards a cost consciousness around legal fees.
Yeah.
And so what that lends itself to is an ability now for what we're referring to as the disruptors in the sector, so strong nationals or mid-market law firms, to offer something slightly different. So we've seen recently some big hires from national practices who've hired from, say, the international law firms, kind of entrepreneurial younger partners who see value in a level playing field, and being able to offer things like better fee structures to their clients. And so we're definitely now seeing a big movement and shift away from what we would usually refer to as the big six towards strong national practices. And actually, a lot of the data, a lot of the commentary that's come out recently shows that the firms that are hiring the most partners are your strong national practices, which were previously thought of as mid-market, but are now definitely competing against those big firms, especially in an area like energy where more lawyers are being entrepreneurial and thinking about exactly, am I at the right platform to get the value out of my skill set? I think a really important factor as well for the partners are around the different fee structures and equity structures. And I think it's very difficult for a partner in Australia to know what structures are like at other firms. Unlike the UK, where there seems to be a lot of information, a lot of publicly available information on what the structures can look like. In Australia, what you kind of tend to find when you're speaking with partners is that they know what their structure is. They know potentially the structure of maybe a few of their friends or firms they may have worked at previously, but they don't tend to know exactly what their competitors are offering.
Okay, interesting.
And I've definitely found that very interesting, having worked across a full spectrum of law firms. The top tier firms aren't always paying the best, which is quite interesting. A lot of the national practices now have very good equity structures, hybrid models, or an easier sort of access to equity. That means that you as an individual partner can get much more value out of your skill set and your practice than if you stayed at a traditional tier one firm that's a bit more institutionalized in terms of clients or has a more competitive structure to get into the equity.
And so have you, on the equity point, have you seen, we've seen a lot of the particularly international firms who are expanding in a large way all around the world. If they hadn't already introduced the non-equity tier, a lot of them are now introducing it because it's a way that you can scale. Obviously, Australian market completely different, but domestic firms in Australia typically, will they have that two-tier system of a non-equity tier to begin with, then moving into equity, or are they more old-fashioned, as it were, and all equity partnerships? And I appreciate it will vary firm by firm, but is there a trend there at all?
That's actually exactly my point. There's no real trend across. There's
you know.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, hopefully, there's no real trend across different categories of firms, but each firm has its own offering. The non-equity partner point is very interesting because a lot of Australian lawyers don't even sort of recognise that, because there's not that many US law firms in Australia. You can name on one hand who would offer a non-equity salaried partner title. The majority of the firms offer some form of hybrid model. So it might not be a salaried title, but there might be guaranteed points in the first, say, 1 to 3 years. And there are still the full equity models, obviously the more traditional structures, but each has its own nuance, each has its own structure in place. Certain firms offer bonuses to non-equity partners in a certain way that will allow you to earn significant amount of money even though you're not in the equity. So it really depends on the law firm. And as I say, it is very difficult to know any information on equity structures unless you're speaking to someone who's speaking to those firms.
Fine, brilliant. And I guess lastly, and sort of before we run out of time, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, we've spoken previously about people deciding to sort of leave Australia and move elsewhere, work in, whether it be London, whether it be the US or whatever. But obviously the second half of that is that actually often these people want to come back, or it may be people who are in those jurisdictions who are interested, not dissimilar to you, in moving to Australia for a combination of lifestyle, professional, family reasons and what have you. So I guess your advice, if you were talking to a lawyer who is not based in Australia but is interested in Australia, either returning or coming in for the first time, I mean, I know you deal with the senior end, and so that also gets more complicated, but I guess just as a more general piece of advice, when is the best time for someone to come home, as it were, if they've had experience elsewhere? Is there a set time, or is it just come down to what the market's doing and what practice area they're in?
So I think regardless of practice area, everyone knows if you go and work in a more mature, sophisticated market, you are immediately sought after in the Australian market. Yeah. You're a market leader as soon as you return. I think I wouldn't put much of an emphasis on time frame, but what I would say is that going back to, say, the sector I'm focusing, which is energy, we don't have many specialists in renewable energy in Australia. What we tend to find is that the Australian market has traditionally, over the last decade, been massively infrastructure focused. And so the best or the highest demands are for those lawyers who've gone to, so let's say the UK or the US. They've worked in what we'd say is that kind of full cradle to grave offering in renewable energy teams, rather than it being specific to practice area. Especially if you go to the UK, somewhere like Linklaters in the E&I team, you have that full service of project financing, project documentation, etc. It's those lawyers that return to Australia that see their careers really progress and springboard. So a couple of examples, I'm working with a few lawyers at the moment who are phenomenal lawyers. They're technically the best lawyers in the market because of the fact they've spent time abroad. They are gold dust. Every client I work with wants to hire that person. It also goes back to that point around clients. Clients in the energy space have become incredibly savvy. I think that's very well known in the market now. So where we used to have a market where you had institutionalized clients that would usually only work with particular law firms or particular people at those firms who are sort of older partners, those clients are now recognizing that the more junior partners are technically better. They're the ones doing the actual legal documents. And again, on that point around sort of looking at your practice, some of those partners are now sort of seeing that they are recognised by their clients, they're technically the best, and they're in structures sometimes that don't give them the best remuneration for the quality of the work that they're delivering. So it's actually those partners now who are thinking in a more entrepreneurial and savvy way. But to the point around relocators or returners, the more experience you have in an international market, the better your career will progress in Australia. So I wouldn't say there's a particular time frame, but I would always encourage people to spend a stint abroad, bring that skill set from a more mature market back to Australia. And clients, as I say, are very savvy to that, and therefore so are the law firms that are recruiting.
So they can use it as a career accelerator, really.
Absolutely. Especially in energy, where the UK is far beyond Australia in terms of renewable energy. The sophistication of the market, the types of the projects that they do in the UK, if you've done that work in solar, wind, BESS, you come back to Australia, you've got a skill set that a lot of your peers don't have in the Australian market.
No, completely makes sense. Well, look, Kumara, it's been great to have you back. Next time we will do it in Australia, I promise you. But thank you for rejoining me, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Australia or LA?
Or LA. I mean, there's always a direct flight, as we know now.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ben. Good to speak.